Hi, and welcome to 60 for 30, a budget Magic the Gathering project that usually looks to get you a 60 card playable deck for right around $30. Today, we're doing something a little different. You might have noticed, or most likely not, that I haven't posted a video in a while, frankly because I'm way better at coming up with modern decks than standard decks, especially when standard hasn't really been striking me with inspiration. So I've just been taking some time off, because I don't want to flood you guys with modern decks, since I know standard is much more popular. However, we have a new set coming out, and instead of doing a deck list for it, since I will be doing deck lists once it comes out, I decided to make a fool of myself by making predictions about card prices and what's going to be good and what could potentially be good for the budget deck builder. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to start by running down a list of all 13 Mythics in the Rivals of Ixalan set. I'm going to tell you what they're selling for now, what I think they'll be selling for when Dominaria comes out in 3 months, and then at the 3-month mark we can all come back and I'll make a video laughing at how wrong I was about pretty much everything. At the end of the video, I'm also going to highlight 5 rare cards that are coming out that I think are interesting because they're either underrated, I think they'll be strong and budget affordable, so think about including them in budget decks, or just plain good and cool. Alright, so to start with, our list of Mythics. We're going to be looking at how good the card is in a vacuum, how good it is compared to other cards available, and whether or not it has a spot in the current constructed, standard, or commander metagame. And we're also, for the most part, going to be looking at how similar cards have performed in the past. Now, spoiler alert, not a lot of these Mythics are going to slot nicely into constructed decks and be instantly playable, so this is going to be a fairly underwhelming list. Lots of hope for the budget deck builder, because a lot of these cards I am predicting will not be worth a ton of money. So without further ado, number 13, Timestream Navigator. This card is not good. A 1/1 for 2 mana is what you're going to be looking at a lot of the times. It is a pirate, so there are some tribal synergies, and time walk effects where you get an extra turn are cool and very popular, but this one's only activatable if you have 10 or more permanents, which a lot of the time you're just not going to have, and then you're still going to have to sink 6 mana into getting this extra turn. You're going to have to spend 4 mana on your first turn to even get that second turn. I just don't see a scenario where this card is consistently turn-onable. If you're running it in your deck, you're missing out on a lot of power just for that potential extra turn. If you have 10 or more permanents, it seems like a win more card that's only helpful if you have a good board state to take advantage of that one card, but it doesn't actually help you establish that board state. So I see this being a card similar to Sage of Hours, where yeah, extra turns cards are cool, people like them, but this is not going to be played in almost anything outside of Commander. I can see it being fairly popular there, but with pretty much no constructed use. I think this will take a steep dive from the $9 you can order this card for now, and I expect it to be the cheapest card available that's a Mythic in 3 months when Dominaria comes out. Brief aside, I'm listing these in order, not how good I think they are, but my predicted price. We're going to start at the bottom, $1, and work our way up to the top. I thought about doing this in like how cool I think these cards are and how good they are, but then I changed the order, but in both lists, Timestream Navigator was the 13th card. Number 12 is Camana the Tyrant or Orazca. Just because this card isn't doing anything that you want it to do. For 3 mana, you're getting a fine body, but not a particularly impressive body. And it is a Merfolk Lord card, but except for its ability to tap 5 Merfolk you control and put a +1/+1 counter on each of them, it's not going to do a whole lot to make your Merfolk better, and its other abilities are just taking Merfolk out of what you want to be using them for. Merfolk is probably going to be a fairly tempo-based, quick deck, low to the ground, so you don't want to be leaving 3 Merfolk up to tap and draw a card. It's cool we have a legendary blue-green Merfolk that I guess maybe Commander people will like it if they're running blue-green Merfolk, but this card is not, I think Blue-green Merfolk isn't going to be a competitive standard deck, and even if it was, I don't think it would want to run this card. Like Admiral Beckett Brass, it's cool, but it's not a good lord that you want to be running in your deck. So I think it'll be much lower than its current listed $11 price. Then we have a Lenda. I'm going to say a lot of the similar things. You're spending 4 mana for a 1/1 body. This card has a much better upside than the previous one, than Camana did, because you can envision a scenario where you play a Lenda, you get to untap, or you play her, and on that turn you already have an established board. You swing with a few vampire tokens, they die, maybe one of your opponent creatures dies if you're running some death touch creatures, so by the time it gets to your opponent's turn you have this 3/3, 4/4 lifelinker that if you die you're going to get some tokens. But it's tough to evaluate cards on just their best case scenario. What this really is a 4 mana 1/1 lifelink. You can play Sacred Cat and get a 1/1 lifelinker for 1 mana, and when it dies you get a vampire token. It's situationally much better than that, which is why I think it's better than Camana, but it's kind of a... When you evaluate this card, it's so tempting to look at what it could be, but honestly what it'll most likely be in most cases is a 1/1 lifelink creature for 4 mana. Twilight Prophet is a sweet card. I think it has more EDH potential than some of the other cards that we've seen thus far, just because with Ascend and getting the City's Blessing, you're going to do that a lot in EDH or Commander. And drawing an extra card, draining each opponent, and gaining life, those are all good things in Commander, and it doesn't even come on a bad body, a 2/4 flying creature. So it's fine, but there's no standard deck that wants this right now. Right? The Scarab God wants its Angels of Jubilee invention. The Temur Energy deck isn't going to run this. Approach isn't going to run this. There's no standard constructed deck that's going to run it, and it's not good enough on its own because it's only phenomenal if you have the Ascend ability and the City's Blessing. So I don't think that this is going to be anywhere near its $9 value in 3 months. Trapjaw Tyrant, when let's try that sentence again. When I told you that I'd had this list organized differently, I think I had Trapjaw Tyrant as high as number 5 at one point, just because I think it's a sweet card. It has the potential to do an awful lot, even if you're not targeting it with enraged triggers like Ryle. Even if you're just playing this as a 5/5 creature for 5 mana, it makes your opponent's attacks really tough from that point on, and I think it's a pretty good card. Not tier 1 constructed standard good, but if the price drops low enough and I was building a budget deck, this is going to be tough for a lot of people to deal with. And it even has some relevance in a meta where 4/4 tokens from the Scarab God are pretty prevalent, because it's a 5/5, so unless that creature, Angel of Invention, has flying, you know, you can block it. You can block creatures brought back with Godfarer's Gift, and then you're going to have a 5/5 blocker that'll kill that creature and exile another creature. So I think this card can do a lot of work. I just don't think it fits anywhere in the current metagame. So I think that it'll be mostly overlooked, but I am a big fan of this card. I think it's super cool. But another thing to consider, you notice over here on the right I have similar cards. Angel of Sanctions is probably just better because you're always going to get to exile a creature when you play it. For similar mana cost, it's a flying body that does this. It targets it and you can recur it from the graveyard if it gets killed. And Angel of Sanctions doesn't see play anywhere, so I'm not necessarily high on Trapjaw Tyrant getting to see any playing time, but I think it's pretty cool. Next we have Sakana the Primal Calamity, which is a card that is sweet and very, 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 very strong. The problem being, if you look at the top of the card, this sucker costs 9 mana. That means that you're not going to ever see it in Constructed. It's just not going to happen. There are not enough good ways to ramp into this. So this is strictly there for Commander. Stick it in your Gishath Dinosaur EDH deck. It'll be awesome there. Someone in my playgroup runs that. I'm looking forward to seeing this baby kick my butt a ton. It's a sweet card. It gets around to costing 9 mana by untapping all your lands after you cast it, so if you do get there, it is not a do-nothing card. You can use all of its abilities potentially the turn you play it. And then it's an awesome 9/9 Vigilance Reach Trample creature. So it's super cool, super strong. It's just not going to see a place in Constructed. There's literally no way. Next we get to Planeswalkers. So going back to me talking about the time I had this list organized by how good / cool I thought these cards were, I think Angrath the Flame Chained I had as number 12 at one point. Just because it's a 5 mana Planeswalker that doesn't do a lot, right? So you can make your opponent discard a card and lose 2 life. That's pretty minimal for 5 mana in Constructed. The Threaten ability to steal a creature, untap it, and if it costs 3 or less, sacrifice it, is pretty good in the right deck, but you can only do it once unless Angrath gets to stick around for a while, which isn't going to happen a ton. You're never going to ult this guy. So I just... like, he's there for his +1 ability or his one-time activation of steal a creature, attack with it, maybe it dies. So maybe as a curve topper to an aggressive red-black deck, but I don't even think that I'd play it there. But when I went and did this list by my predicted price, it did rise as high as number 7, just because Planeswalkers, people like them. They generally, unless you're Dove and Ban, you generally don't drop below $2 while you're in Standard. People like Planeswalkers, so I can't see it being a $1 Mythic, but I don't particularly like this card. Welcome back to Commanderville. We're at Polyraptor, number 6. This card, it's so capable of taking over a game by itself in Commander with the right setup. People will love this for Commander. I can see it being run in green decks that have no other dinosaur synergy. It's just cool, it's fun, but this is not going to be a standard card. I feel like a broken record. This is not going to be it's not going to be playable. It costs 8 mana. It's just not happening. Maybe in a Growing Rites of Itlamok deck, but this isn't even the payoff that you won for that, because you ramp into it and then you just have a 5/5 body that makes tokens of itself if it's dealt damage, but it's not going to have that immediate impact that you want. I say it's similar to Giant Ataphage. It's actually much better than Giant Ataphage was, because you actually had to attack with Giant Ataphage, whereas Polyraptor can block, and even if it dies blocking, it'll make a copy of itself. So it's much stronger than Giant Ataphage, but they just remind me they're very thematically similar cards. But hey, 8 mana, you can't play that in a competitive Standard deck. What you can play is a 4 mana 4/3 flying that is tough for your opponents to kill. I love this card. When we had this list organized by how much I like these cards, I think Rekindling Phoenix was 3rd. It's a good body, it has evasion, it's tough to get rid of. I think there is a good green-red deck to be made with Rekindling Phoenix and Ripjaw Raptor that prey on how many 4/4s are in the meta right now, because they both can kill a 4/4 and generate card advantage, because Rekindling Phoenix is going to come back and Ripjaw Raptor is going to win the battle with the 4/4, being a 4/5, and you'll draw a card off the Enrage trigger. But the problem with that deck that I think is out there that's very good that you could build is that it's not Temur Energy. It's not the Scarab God. So this is a card I can see once energy rotates and we live in the dark world of the Scarab God and God's Pharaoh's Gift matching up with those decks, okay. But right now, it just doesn't slot into anything, even though it's an amazing, sweet card, and it's not good enough to be a build-around card on its own. It doesn't slot into Runap Red because Hazoret's better in that deck. So again, we have a card that's cool, doesn't have a home right now, so I don't see it being particularly expensive. And then we have Haughtily, Radiant Champion. The one redeeming characteristic of this card is that it's 4 mana. And 4 mana Planeswalkers are sometimes pretty okay. This card is ranked this high just because it's a Planeswalker and people like them, and it costs 1 less mana than Angrath, so I think it'll be a little better, maybe? But what does this card do when you play it? It either makes itself bigger, but only if you have a big board state, in which case you're probably winning anyway, and you'd rather just be playing like a better card, or it pumps a creature at sorcery speed for a marginal amount depending on how many creatures you control. Again, this card's pretty good if you have a ton of creatures, but not even very good, just like okay. So this is a card if you like playing Planeswalkers, if you like playing creature decks with Planeswalkers in them, I imagine you'll be able to pick this up pretty cheaply in the future. I don't see this being a format warping card at all. So here's a card, the Immortal Son, that is just playable in Commander. There's no standard deck that wants this. There's no standard deck that wants any of these cards. But this does too much to not be pretty good in almost any Commander deck because it's an artifact. It can be played in any color combinations. Makes your spells cost less, makes your creatures stronger, you draw cards, and it protects you from your opponent's Planeswalkers, which is just all really good for 6 mana. So people are going to want this card. That'll keep the price up a little bit, but at 6 mana, there's moral of this story, of this entire video, there's no deck that wants this in Constructed Standard right now. So you shouldn't play it in a Constructed Standard deck right now. If you play Commander, here's a card for you. Enjoy. So, having just said that, Azure the Lawbringer, I think, is the card that I have the most potential to be wrong about, but hear me out. I think this could be played in Standard. So, before we get to that, obvious Commander relevance, it's a big creature, has a cool ability, protects itself a little bit, it's a legendary creature so it can be a Commander, this guy's cool, so Commander's going to want this, but what doesn't Commander want? I'm comparing this to Nicol Bolas, the God Pharaoh, as a card which sees fringe play in some energy decks just because it's a big cool threat at Mythic that maybe is a one-of in a deck. And if you look at what that card did price-wise, it took its sweet time, but it's down to maybe $6, $7 as a card, dropping from like the 25 it started at. So as far as filling a niche, this card could be similar, because I think this card could actually be played as a one-of or a sideboard card as a one-of in God Pharaoh's Gift, because what this card does is, unfortunately, in today's Standard, you cannot just tap out 6 mana, play this card, because your opponent, even though they can't cast instant or sorceries on their next turn, can kill it with an instant on your turn, kill it with a creature that when they play it, it kills your guy. They can cast it out. That's an enchantment removal. And it doesn't do a ton when it comes into play, except give you a good blocker, because the second ability that's mirrors Sphinx's Revelation is only when you attack. So you have to untap and get rid of this guy's summoning sickness and able to attack with him. But God Pharaoh's Gift gives it haste and doesn't cost any mana. So if you get this guy in your graveyard, get God's Pharaoh's Gift, there might be a turn where, because you get the creature back for free, you have a lot of mana available, and then you can attack with a 4/4 flying creature, and have all your mana up to draw 3 cards, gain 3 life off an attack. which is pretty good, and his first ability isn't irrelevant either. It protects you from something like a Fumigate that turn. So I could see this maybe coming into a Godfarer's Gift, potentially Scarab God deck, but also potentially not. So this is me swinging for the fences, guys. I 100% reserve the right to be wrong about this, and tell me in the comments about how wrong I am about it, because otherwise it's not going to see play. You don't want this in a control deck because you have to tap out on your turn to do this, which isn't what control decks want to do. But maybe a God's Pharaoh Gift. Alright, so I'm predicting that it will maybe be a more expensive Mythic because it could potentially be played in a standard deck and has Commander appeal. And then our number one star of the show, Azores Gateway. So card evaluation is interesting because you have to look at the best case scenario and the worst case scenario. So the best case scenario for this card is very apparent because you flip it. If you have 15 life, you can tap it to add 15 of any one color mana to your mana pool, which is pretty good in any format. That's good in Modern, that's good in Commander, that's good in Standard. If you have the right list that wants that much mana and can actually put it to use. But you also have to look at the downside of this card, like the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario is it still generates a good amount of card selection because you're paying just 2 to invest in it, and then you're paying 1 and tapping it. That's a very small price. There's no other price. You don't have to sacrifice a creature. You're just paying 1 on the end of your opponent's turn to draw a card and exile a card from your hand, which will help you get through a lot of your deck, find answers. So there's no standard shell that wants this right now, but there are potential standard shells that could show up, some kind of control deck that wants this to help them have the right answers all the time. This is obviously super good in Commander. I can't really think of a Commander deck that wouldn't want to run this as an artifact, just because for such a small investment it's going to get you so much sifting through your deck, and if it flips then it's going to be ridiculously powerful. So yeah, this is a playable card in some formats. Probably not Standard, but potentially Standard and definitely Commander, which is why it took our number 1 spot. I think people are going to want this card, people are going to buy this card, it's going to be hard to get a hold of this card, so I could see this holding its value for a while. So in summary on the Mythics, really none of them fit into a standard deck, none of them are strong enough to create their own standard deck, and potentially when energy finally rotates next fall, things like Ripjaw Raptor and Rekindling Phoenix could become much more playable, since they'll have a decent matchup against the Scarab God, but Wizards made a mistake with the Scarab God and gave it everything you could ever want in a Magic card, stapled to 1 unkillable body, so why not just play the Scarab God? Is honestly how I feel about that once energy's gone. So now on to another interesting part of our video, my review of a few rares that I think that definitely caught my eye as either being underrated, undervalued, good right now that people aren't necessarily paying attention to, or something that will likely be a cheap card but is strong enough to be a good, hey, I'm going to put this in my budget standard deck list. So first is Slaughter the Strong, just because I think it's potentially decent against energy with your giant long tusk cubs, your giant bristling hydras, because if they get over 4 power, all of them are gone. And this is also, I mean, run this card in any list that you're staying low to the ground. If you're playing a vampire deck where all your guys have 1, 2, 3 power, run Slaughter the Strong, because if your opponent's running any creatures with power 4, 5 or greater, then this is going to get rid of them. So I think this is a pretty strong card in a best case scenario, and it's a pretty strong card in a worst case scenario. Like, it's not great, it's not the greatest board wipe ever, because it's not always going to be a kill all their creatures, keep all your creatures. But even if they have 1 creature that's big, this will get rid of it, right? And then it's a 1-for-1 getting rid of their biggest creature. So I think it's pretty playable. Might not be an all-star on the Pro Tour, but definitely playable if in the right deck. Then you have Seafloor Oracle. This is one of the better Merfolk lords to keep an eye on, because if you're playing a low-to-the-ground evasive Merfolk deck, when you play this card on turn 4, it itself doesn't do anything, but your Merfolk will get its buff on that turn. So you can attack and get in 1, 2, 3 Merfolk that turn on turn 4 and start drawing a ton of cards to keep your engine going. So I don't think Merfolk would be competitive, but if you are playing a Merfolk deck, if you're building it to be small and evasive, then this guy should be in your list. Like River Sneak, right? Imagine this guy with River Sneak. You have River Sneak out, you play this guy, River Sneak becomes unblockable, gets bigger, and you get in, you draw a card. It's pretty good. Pretty good. Warkite Marauder fills a similar role for pirates. If you're running a pirate list that has blue in it, this guy should be in your 60 card list, because he's a 2/1 flyer for 2, which is pretty playable with the pirate subtype in a pirate deck by itself. But then he's also going to help your other pirates get through, your fleet, whatever it's called, the Marauder, the one with Menace that makes pirate tokens, that's going to get through. Your Ruin Raiders are going to get through. It's going to help itself get through by taking flying off their 1 flying blocker. It gives your deck a lot of pressure if you're being aggressive with your pirate deck. So if you're playing pirates, you should be playing 4 of this guy probably. This is a card that isn't necessarily under the radar, but if it finds the right deck list, this could be very, very, very good. Because you have to think about immediate value, right? You play this card, you attack, maybe you get some treasure tokens out of it, and if you don't, you can still flip this the turn you play it, because it checks at your end step, not your upkeep. And I'm thinking modern for this. There are definitely modern lists that can get 5 artifacts out by turn 4 or 3 when you play this. There are definitely modern decks that get 5 artifacts out and can get creatures through easily. I'm thinking an affinity type list where you have flying and hard to block creatures that are getting through. So you play this, you get some treasure tokens by swinging, you flip it, and then you're playing an Infinity Tron hybrid list where you have early pressure, but then also are sitting on like 10 mana on turn 5 to play a ridiculous whatever you want Ulamog with it. It's probably a bit unreliable because you're only going to be able to cast Ulamog if you have this card. But I think there's potentially a niche there, so I'd keep an eye on it, because it's interesting, and it can be so strong and has very little downside in the right deck, because you're either netting yourself more artifact tokens for cranial platings, more mana for sacrificing them, or you're ramping into a giant pool of mana with the Vault of Cataclysm. Catlacan, I guess is how you pronounce that. So, interesting card. And then my favorite card, my most under the radar card, I'm going to build a deck with this, so I hope it's a cheap card, Madonnas Climb. So, this card's interesting because it's good in a ton of scenarios. It is a lot of value accrued over the game if you're just getting a +1/+1 creature on a counter on a creature every turn. You don't have to flip it if you don't want to, because you can pick a different creature. It's a pretty good investment for just 3 mana. It slots into some existing deck lists, which is a pleasant change. Timur Energy can run this with no problem and has a lot of +1/+1 counters in it. So it can easily flip this card in a pre-existing tier 1 deck list. And then the ability on the Winged Temple of Vraska, 3 mana, tap this land to double a creature's power and toughness and give it flying. turns your 4/4 long tusk cub into an 8/8 flying long tusk cub, puts a lot of pressure on. So I'm not sure where this would fit in that list, but you would take out, but it does fit in that list and would work pretty well. It would also work really well with a Winding Constrictor Sultai list, green, blue, black, +1/+1 counters, Verdurous Gearhulk, Rishkar, Pima Renegade, Walking Ballista, you name it, with Glint Sleeve Siphoner, right? Make that bigger and hard to block. Like, I think this is just a good card because, again, we always talk best case, worst case scenarios. Best case scenario, this is getting your 5/5s into 10/10 flying creatures very early. Worst case scenario, every turn you're just making a creature bigger, and it's not like you have to put this on a creature that can get blown out by a fatal push, right? This is a standalone enchantment. So I can see this being good in a lot of instances. So I'm pretty high on this card, not as a instant tier 1 standard edition, but it can do a lot. So like I said, I'm pretty stoked. I like this card a lot. Big fan. And that's it. That's our hilariously wrong predictions. That's our rundown of mythics and some interesting rares to keep an eye on. I do intend on doing more of these videos with more sets, so let me know if you liked them or hated them so I can either keep that going or change that. And stay tuned for 3 months when Dominaria is coming out and the standards adapted to the introduction of these cards, and we can see what these price points that I predicted, how much they're off by. I fully expect Timestream Navigator to be the best card ever printed, and my prediction of it being a $1 mythic to be off by about $70. So come back in 3 months and we'll share that wonderful experience together, laughing about how dumb I am. That's it for today. That's 60 for 30. Like this video, leave a comment, tell me what you think about the new set coming out. We'll talk about it. Talk to me on Reddit, where I'm going to post this video as well. Like, subscribe, whatever, all those YouTube things that people say. And I'll see you next time. Have fun out there, guys and gals. That's what it's all about.